Well, I decided I'm glad I'm in the media because I would hate to work with the media. And so I'll tell you a lot of what you already know about the media, but maybe some ideas that help you be more effective. Okay, we all know the media is hopeless, right? I mean, that's pretty much been that way for a long time, and it's only getting worse. I remember when I worked for Better Homes and Gardens magazine in Des Moines, and on the side I was organizing the Iowa caucuses, which was a strange thing. And I realized the Des Moines Register was no friend as a grassroots activist. Des Moines Register, no relation to my paper, the Orange County Register, always has had a reputation as a pretty hard left newspaper. And we tried breaking in and getting our story told in a way that didn't make us look like right-wing kooks. And anyway, I used to walk by the Des Moines Register building every day and look at it and scowl. I couldn't walk past it without scowling. And I thought, you know, what am I going to do about it? What can one guy do about this damn media, liberal media? I can't stand it. So I didn't do what people do to me all the time and call and say, you bastards, you know, you're biased. Oh, really? I'm an editorial writer, and you notice that I'm biased. Okay. So that happens a lot. So no, what I did instead was they had a town meeting at the Des Moines Register because they were hemorrhaging circulation, which if you're in the newspaper business, that's what we talk about a lot, why we're hemorrhaging circulation. And one of the favorite meetings was one where we talked about, oh, we're doing really well because we're hemorrhaging less than our competitors. So that's the mentality in the media. So what did I do? They had a meeting about how do we get you conservative kooks to read our newspaper. So they decided they would print a column, a weekly column. They had one non-liberal columnist a week in the Des Moines Register, and it wasn't that great of a columnist, and I won't mention his name, Cal Thomas, and because his focus wasn't on the things I was interested in. He's a perfectly good columnist, seeing it's being recorded, and a lot more successful and affluent than I am, I'm sure. So anyway, I said, hey, I volunteer, I'll write a column. So I sent a column in, and it was actually good, I think, at least for them. I wrote it to the word. They had a standard, 800 words. So I wrote 800 words. I said, what program do you use? And I forget, and I put it in that program. How long are your headlines? Fine, I put exact headline. I did exact format. I walked in very politely, handed it to them, and sure enough, it got in. And I'm not sure if it was good or the fact that it was really easy for them. And journalists are busy. And it's ridiculous. I tell people I write probably 5 to 6 editorials a week, the official newspaper editorials, a column, a book review every couple weeks. Now we have blogs, which I'll get to later, where I do 4 or 5, probably about 2 or 3 a day at least, okay? And then I do other things, like proofreading and all. So we have a pretty busy day, and we have to actually get out and report things, even on the editorial page, and talk to people. And it's a busy day, so we don't have a lot of time for people who want to yammer on about bullshit, which explains one of the reasons why we're rude. Also, rude people like to become journalists because it's one of the few places we can be rude and not get fired. You could probably imagine how well I do at a PR firm. And we get to say whatever we want to people, pretty much. So anyway, that's the good part of the journalist. And we get to lose our train of thought here. So anyway, I got involved in the media. That's how I dealt with it. Now, most of you probably are not looking for career switches and are not insane and don't want to take massive pay cuts, so you're not going to ditch what you're doing and go into the media, but you still can get your message into the media. Okay, we'll dispense with a couple of things. Yes, it's a dying industry, but it's not a dead industry, and there are always going to be, you always need news reporting, even the blogs, most of them that are even successful, link heavily to news stories. So you need to report things, whatever the medium is. I don't care if it's delivered to your doorstep in paper or whether you read it online. You still need media. You have to get your message out. One of the great things still about the newspaper industry is it's very vertical. Or it's horizontal. You see, I'm a journalist. I can't even keep. No, but it goes to everybody. It's horizontal, as opposed to most of us are used to vertical publications, where lots of in-depth information for people who are really interested in certain things. This goes to everybody, and maybe some people are only reading the ads, but you still theoretically get out to a lot of people. And I have found, and the reason I'm still in the business, is you do have an ability to set the agenda and change things. In Orange County, now you can't, people have a misconception. I can't, if I write about some strange picadillo that I'm interested in, and I pound my fist in my weekly column about it, and it doesn't resonate with anyone, it's not going to make any difference at all. People will go, wow, Steve's really weirder than I thought. However, you do have an ability of touching something that really people care about but can't put words into, and I think this whole congestion mobility thing is, because I've written about it and have had a pretty good response, making the argument of how, you know, our housing regulations hurt minority communities, and that those are things that are true. We're on the right side of it. The other side doesn't want us to talk about those things. We have a vehicle to talk about those things, so it's a good idea to try to get into the media. And you know, and even though it is, of course, it's a liberally biased profession. No duh, as my kids would say. Although I couldn't get any editor of my newspaper to admit that, but it is true. And it's not that we. I'm on the editorial side, and the reporting side is separate. But so I'm obviously supposed to be biased. But you know, all the reporters I know have opinions too, and it's the stories they choose and the people they choose to speak. Now, there's some improvement. Adrian mentioned that universal health care thing. Well, the LA Times, which is a competitor with us in Orange County, but they're known as a liberal paper, but their reporting on that was wonderful. They did the front page stories about the conflict of interest. If there's a good story, you can get it in. We've had impact, my columns had impact on the proposed light rail line. In fact, I'm credited or blamed as one of the people for stopping a wasteful line. I've been able to highlight pension abuses in our community. Eminent domain, the reason I wrote the book is I was writing about all these abuses in our community and spotlighting things that are unjust. It's not because columnists were so wise, it's just if you spotlight something that's unjust and people agree with you, it has a way of getting attention. So you need to help figure out ways to get your message across. Okay, let's see. Now, there's been, and one good example on eminent domain, since we've all talked about that a lot. John Funn of the Wall Street Journal talks about the people who support these eminent domain projects, and it's true about light rail, called LOOT, Leaders of Our Town, and they're interested in looting for their own private benefit. There's no question about it. And journalists and publishers tend to be part of that loot coalition. There's no question about it. However, I talked with John Kramer over the Institute for Justice, and he talked about how he got some shifting. Used to be all these economic development projects that use eminent domain. The journalists would do these puff pieces, and I've seen them. I've pounded my fist and thrown things across the room when I pick up these in our own newspaper. I'm like, how come they're not talking about tax increment financing or eminent domain? So how come? But anymore, though, after the Kelo decision, and even before, John talked about how he was able to convince 60 Minutes to do a story on Suzette Kelo and on the Lakewood situation before the New London case, and he was able to actually get some good news coverage that advanced our side, and it's not really. It doesn't take that much. I mean, it takes a lot of effort, but it's not, you don't need any brilliant strategy. So I'm going to give you a few keys to, it was 10, but I can't add very well, so it might be 11. So 10 keys to working with the evil, liberal, biased media. And these are very, very basic things. But as someone who has my picture in the paper with the phone number and email, it's amazing the degree to which people don't follow these very basic things. People with messages. One of my favorite ones is I have a guy call, this is just typical. He's yelling at me for not covering some arcane but significant event that happened in one of the 34 cities that we cover in the county. And why didn't you cover it? I'm like, why didn't you call me yesterday before it happened? You know, I don't know. I now know about it. Wish I would have covered it, but you didn't call me yesterday. So that's one of those things. That's the first one. You know, think ahead. Something coming up. Who do you want to know about it? And you ought to call beforehand. That's a really radical idea. Another thing, and I find this all the time. I'm libertarian, okay, so sometimes my conservative readers get annoyed at me, like when I write about police brutality, and I sound like Maxine Waters on that issue, but she happens to be right on that issue. So I get the calls once in a while. It's not that often, but once in a while, like I did one on police brutality. The cops who gunned down two big cops wearing all their body armor, gunned down a 120-pound teenager with a penknife that was about this big with 18 rounds, and I thought that was a little bit of an abuse of power. And so I got the "you damn member of the liberal media" calls, which I'm not used to getting, and I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. Yes, the media is liberal. Yes, it's biased. Yes, it's establishmentarian. Yes, it has probably any problem you've thought of. Yeah, it's true. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to contact us. That doesn't mean it's uniformly liberal. That doesn't mean there aren't. Newspapers are big organizations. We're not conspiracies. That's the other thing. People think we're conspiracies and that the publisher in the morning tells us how we're going to slant the news. And they really think that. And then we dutifully go to our office and type out the official party line. I don't know who our reporters are most of the time. I'm on the editorial page. At a libertarian editorial page in the newspaper business, we're kept rather separate. I know more LA Times reporters than I do Orange County Register reporters, and they're always introducing me to people I work with, and it's kind of funny. So, and that is true. That's an absolute true story. A lot of our reporters don't want to be seen with us because it might rub off whatever it is I have. So. And we do make it difficult sometimes for what they cover, because if they're writing nice things about some economic development plan and I'm calling the leader of the plan the bulldozer, which is true, Rick named a couple people the bulldozer, it doesn't make life easy for them. But that said, I know a lot of really fair reporters. I mean, I know a lot of reporters who they're all going to tend to be liberal, not all of them, but most. But I know some really reporters who tend to be liberal in their beliefs, but who are very fair. So that's the second pointer. Don't write us off just because some of the bad things you know is true. And there are various types of news. I know some reporters who are hard-edged leftists, but there aren't that many that I know. That some of the environmental reporters and all at newspapers, but most tend to be fairly liberal, of course, in their views, but a lot of them are very fair. So you need to find them out. Okay, the next point is figure out who's who in a newspaper. It's a big bureaucracy. I don't know who's who in the newspaper. I don't know who's covering what, and I've worked there for 8 years. I mean, we have 1,000 people working in this newspaper. People are shifting around their coverage. I don't work in the newsroom. People who work in the newsroom only work in one part of the newsroom. So it's a part of your job as an activist is figure out who the right reporter is. Now, it's not the hardest thing in the world. If you pick up a news story and you're interested in transportation, and there's somebody named Joe Smith who's writing an article about transportation or has the transportation editor after his name or something like that, that's a pretty good sign. That's who you want to talk to. So don't call the wrong, and this happens all the time. You're calling the one reporter who does A when you really need B, and so find the right person. And then understand the distinctions. It's the next point. Understand the distinctions. Editorial's different. You know, and people still don't understand these things. A letter to the editor is not an editorial. A column is not an editorial. Understand the distinctions of how things work. And it's not that hard. It's just you have to pay attention to the newspaper a little bit. And the same thing would be for any media, of course. As I mentioned earlier, don't be put off by a certain level of gruffness. We're constantly on deadlines, and so call and be, and don't be a jerk. I mean, the people who call and are so mad all the time, I mean, they're mad. This is typically what happens. You read some story, you're mad about the bias in it, and then you call and then you lay into us. And then, of course, that gets you off on the right foot. And I'm really wanting to listen to everything else you have to say and meet with you and read your 8 inches of studies. That's the next thing. Don't send, I get reports like this, or really like this, that are probably have great information in it, but you might want to write a 2-sentence summary of what's in that report before I decide to spend an afternoon reading it. So that would help. And when you come to the building to meet with the Register, or any newspaper, try something radical. Have an appointment first. Shower that day. Those are good ideas. Look, one of the problems we have as grassroots activists, I say we because I had been on that side, is city managers, city officials, official sources are very professional, and they wear sport jackets, and they're calm, and they talk factually. And it's really easy when you want to find out about some kind of rail project that you call the transportation official, or on a city you talk to the city manager, the redevelopment official, and he gives you good, accurate information. It's spun, of course it's spun. And then the grassroots activist comes in, and he's slept in his clothes, and he's angry, and then the reporter tends to listen to the person who seems sane, and I can't completely disagree with that. Now, most of the time, the person who seems crazy actually has it right. That's not that, but they find something. I have this group of people, this group from the Drivers for Highway Safety that some of you probably know, that during the Centerline battle, they were a group of retired engineers, and they weren't very PR savvy, but they read the reports. And they called me with their findings, and they were right. They were always right, and the agency always admitted that they were right. So, other thing is send good information. My best sources are people who know the kind of story I'd be interested in, and they don't waste my time with the kind of story they know I'm not going to be interested in. So they get a good story, they call me with it, they follow up, they send me good information, and then if I don't use it, that's life. They go on. Can't read my writing. Oh, yeah, if you're angry about coverage, that's legitimate. Try something radical. Call the reporter who wrote the story and calmly explain to them why it was wrong, or maybe instead of even why it's wrong, another thing that they hadn't considered. When you tell people it's wrong, that gets us a little defensive for some odd reason. And then people will call and say, I want a retraction. And now the chance of a retraction is fairly low, as you might guess, unless there's some glaring factual error. And most of the times, we have a face it and fix it rule. If somebody finds a factual error, I don't mind fixing it at all. But most of the time, it's just they don't like the perspective that I've taken, or on the reporters, the people they interviewed. And then if you're not happy with the reporter, talk to the editor. That's perfectly legitimate. Stick to the facts. Don't make huge demands. You'll be amazed, I think, how I hook people up with editors all the time when they're upset about it, and they're often they call me back and say, "Oh yeah, that was a really good resolution. They're going to take a look at it." We put out a newspaper every day. There's room, room to write other stuff. Okay, here's another thing people forget. Write letters to the editor. That's a very well-read part of the newspaper. Write op-eds. That's how I got started, but you don't have to want to go into this crazy business to write op-eds. And then here's the really radical thing. Follow the guidelines. If you're going to write a letter to the editor and it says keep them to 300 words, try keeping them to 300 words, because when you run out at the bottom of the page, you can't keep going. It's not the computer world. And the chance of getting a 13,000 word, the Unabomber essay in is that got printed, but that was for unusual reasons. Okay, just follow the guidelines, simple stuff, and those who follow the guidelines, and we give high priority to people in the local community who are writing. In fact, we don't give priority to Washington think tanks, I'm sorry. We do print a lot of that stuff, but that's not priority. If somebody in the local community has an opinion, an informed opinion on a transportation matter, that will go above something that comes from even a very, very good think tank. So don't think that you can't get in, and always start with your own local newspaper. Okay, I'll finish up real quick. Befriend reporters and editors, and I don't mean, you have to be chummy, but you could call. I have people who call me all the time, and they don't waste my time. They understand when I'm on a deadline, but they'll call and comment on things, and you don't have to kiss up either. Usually the people who I become friendly with aren't the ones who say, "Oh, that's a great column." I'm like, "Yeah, tell me something I don't know," right? But often they're the ones who hate my column, but are express it respectively. And I have a rule. I say if people are yelling at me, or there are a lot of people will call and they're yammer, and I don't want to talk to them. And I say, if you start calling names, I end the conversation, and that gives me a good out, because they start yelling things at me. They say, "I'm sorry, but I have to end this conversation." So don't call names, which none of you would, of course. But look, you're looking for someone fair, not necessarily someone who agrees with you. You don't need to convert the person. You just need to get them to present your point of view. That's all, or at least interview you, or find a person to interview. And if you don't know something, of course, don't just wing it. I'm on this radio program every couple weeks, and one of the people who's on there, sometimes it doesn't seem burdened by the facts, and it drives me nuts. So make sure it's easier to say I don't know. So okay, and earn credibility. Level with the writer. Don't be spinning. Be reliable. I have people who have never led me wrong. And then if one day they make a mistake, it's understandable. And then I have others who are constantly not telling me the other side of the story. So I come not to trust them, even if I tend to agree with them. Okay, and that's pretty much pretty simple, basic stuff. But there are other things too. The blog world is very energetic these days. We have some local blogs that break news and are closely watched. And so you have to pay attention to blogs. You can get things on blogs. It has some influence. And you could even start your own blog if you're in a community where you start a transit blog. But there are a lot of rules and things as far as making them fresh and lively, accurate, but you can, some political activists started something called OC Blog, and it's been quite a hit, especially among policymakers. And you do, some things you'll write for will influence policymakers, other things will be oriented towards average folks. You want to change their mind. And of course there's radio, talk show, and all the other stuff that you're going to want to pay attention to. Just to summarize, the folks, my best sources, they only pitch stories they know that are up my alley. They don't waste my time. They're friendly, but professional. They understand when I'm on a deadline. They follow up right away with good information. Email is a godsend. People who leave voice messages. It's tough. It's tough during a day when you have 20 voice messages. Or more to get back to people. And I had a guy, he's a decent guy, but he calls me. I happen to be out of town. He calls me, and then I don't get back to him that day, and he calls me again that day and again, and then in the morning I pick up the phone, he goes, "You must be some Mr. Important." Like, I haven't even been here. I mean, I'll get back to you. Give people 24 hours, but an email, you can, we check our email from everywhere, and we can respond to people quickly, and email is really a wonderful thing, so use that a lot. Don't get angry. Don't get upset if you don't get what you want. If you send an op-ed and it doesn't go in, and the second one doesn't go in, and the third one doesn't go in, ask them why not. The fourth one might get in, and that's about it. It's all common sense stuff. But it takes effort. That's the main thing. If you want to get, it's worth it, I think, to get your position. You can shift things, but you need to work at it, and it just means learning the strange and arcane organizations and strange people known as journalists. In some ways we're worse than you think, and in other ways we're not quite so bad. So it's probably worth the effort. Thank you.